North Atlantic, March 1943. Somewhere beneath the grey swells, 44 men huddle inside a steel cylinder barely 60 meters long. The diesel fumes burn their throats. The condensation drips from every surface. They have not seen daylight in 6 days. Above them, unseen destroyers hunt through the darkness. And every man aboard knows what comes next. The distant splash, the seconds of silence, then the thunderous crack of depth charges, splitting the ocean around them. For the crew of a Type 7C U-boat, this is not exceptional. This is routine. Of the 40,000 Germans who served aboard submarines in World War II, roughly 30,000 would never return home. No branch of any armed service in any nation suffered a higher casualty rate. The grey wolves of the Kriegsmarine became, more often than not, the inhabitants of iron coffins. The story of the U-boat sailor is inseparable from the vessel that became his world. The Type 7 submarine, and particularly its ZIC variant, formed the backbone of Admiral Karl Dönitz's underwater fleet. Between 1940 and 1945, German shipyards produced 568 Type C&C boats alone, more submarines of a single class than any other navy would ever build. At 67 meters in length and displacing 769 tons on the surface, the Type 7C was designed for one purpose: to strangle Britain's Atlantic lifeline. It carried 14 torpedoes, fed into 5 tubes, 4 forward and 1 aft. An 80 pm deck gun and various anti-aircraft weapons completed its armament. 2 manned diesel engines pushed it to 17 knots on the surface, while twin electric motors gave it a submerged speed of just under 8 knots. Its theoretical crush depth was 200 meters, though some boats survived descents well beyond that figure. What these specifications do not convey is what it meant to live inside such a machine. The pressure hull of a Type 7C measured just 4.7 meters in diameter at its widest point. Into this space, engineers had crammed the machinery needed to propel, navigate, and fight the vessel, along with all the provisions required for patrols lasting 8 weeks or more. Whatever room remained belonged to the crew. There was not much of it. The torpedo room at the bow doubled as living quarters for the lowest-ranking sailors. Here, bunks were sandwiched between reload torpedoes, each weapon weighing over 1,500 kilograms. At the start of a patrol, with all 14 torpedoes aboard, several bunks had to be folded away entirely. The men who belonged to them slept wherever they could find space, often atop the torpedoes themselves, inches from enough explosive to vaporize the entire boat. Throughout the vessel, space was measured in centimeters. The central control room, nerve center of the submarine, was barely large enough for 4 men to stand without touching. The radio and hydrophone compartments were little more than closets. The diesel engine room thundered with noise and radiated heat that could exceed 40 degrees Celsius in tropical waters. Every pipe, valve, and gauge had a purpose, and every crew member learned to navigate this mechanical labyrinth in complete darkness, because when depth charges began falling, the lights often failed. 59 men shared 35 bunks through a practice called hot bunking. When one sailor's watch ended, he climbed into a bed, still warm from his predecessor's body. Privacy existed for precisely one person aboard, the captain, who enjoyed a curtained alcove barely larger than a coffin. Even officers shared quarters the size of a modest bathroom, their bunks separated by nothing more than green curtains. The air inside a submerged U-boat was a physical presence, thick with the exhalations of 50 men. The reek of diesel fuel that permeated everything, the sharp tang of battery acid, and the accumulated odors of bodies that went unwashed for weeks. Fresh water was too precious to waste on bathing. Every drop came from a small distillation apparatus that could produce 60 litres per day, most of which went to the batteries and the cooking. Shaving was forbidden. Changing clothes was pointless. Sailors emerged from patrols with beards matted to their faces and uniforms stiff with accumulated filth. The humidity was constant and inescapable. Condensation formed on every metal surface, dripping onto charts, equipment, and sleeping men. Mildew bloomed on leather and canvas. Documents rotted if not carefully protected. In the tropics, the heat transformed the boat into a steam bath. In the North Atlantic winter, the same condensation froze solid. Food began each patrol as a relative luxury. Fresh bread, eggs, vegetables, and cured meats filled every available cranny of the boat. Hams hung from pipes in the engine room. Sausages dangled in passageways, but the diesel fumes saturated everything. Within days, the taste of fuel oil became inseparable from every meal. Sailors called it diesel food and learned to eat without breathing through their noses. As weeks passed, the fresh provisions rotted or ran out, replaced by canned goods that all seemed to taste identical. The single tiny galley could accommodate one cook at a time, working with portable stoves in a space smaller than a phone booth. One of the boat's 2 toilets was typically commandeered for food storage at the start of each patrol, leaving 59 men sharing a single head. Even this facility was unusable at depth, where external water pressure prevented flushing. Chamber pots and holding tanks provided the alternative, adding their contribution to the atmosphere. The psychological strain of submarine service may have exceeded even the physical hardships. A U-boat patrol meant weeks in a metal tube, cut off from sunlight, fresh air, and any contact with the outside world beyond terse radio messages. The same faces surrounded each man every waking moment. The same cramped spaces pressed in from all sides. Some sailors found the claustrophobia manageable. Others fought it silently every hour of every day. There was nowhere to go, nothing to look at, no escape from the constant proximity of other men. The routine of watches, maintenance and meals provided structure, but it could not substitute for space or freedom of movement. Experienced crews developed a particular form of stoicism, a fatalistic acceptance that their survival depended on factors largely beyond their control. New sailors learned to adopt this attitude or suffered accordingly. The Germans who crewed these submarines were overwhelmingly young. The average age aboard a U-boat was 20. Many of the enlisted men were teenagers, boys who had volunteered for submarine service attracted by its elite status, the double pay, and perhaps some romantic notion of undersea warfare. Officers were often barely older, lieutenants in their mid-20s commanding vessels, and crews in situations that would have tested admirals. The Kriegsmarine's submarine arm drew heavily from working-class backgrounds, from families of sailors and fishermen who understood the sea. Training was rigorous and extended, typically 6 months or more before a man was assigned to an operational boat. But no amount of training could fully prepare anyone for their first depth charge attack. New recruits entered the submarine service through a system designed to transform raw sailors into efficient cogs of an underwater war machine. Basic training established physical fitness and naval fundamentals. Specialized schools taught the intricacies of diesel engines, electric motors, torpedo mechanics, and radio operation. Crews assembled months before their boats were completed, training together while their vessel took shape in the shipyard. By the time a new submarine was commissioned, its crew had practiced emergency procedures until they could perform them in total darkness, had learned the location of every valve and switch, and had developed the instinctive coordination that submarine operations demanded. The flotilla system organized U-boats into administrative groups based at ports along the French Atlantic coast. Lorient, Brest, Saint-Nazaire, and La Pallice became the primary operating bases after the fall of France gave Germany direct access to the Atlantic. Massive concrete submarine pens protected the boats from Allied bombing, their roofs thick enough to withstand any bomb then in existence. Crews returning from patrol found rest facilities, medical care, and the peculiar pleasures of occupied France. Leave was often granted between missions, a chance to decompress from weeks of accumulated stress. Some men married French women and started families, knowing they might not survive their next patrol. The bonds formed in these flotillas lasted well beyond the war, surviving veterans gathering for reunions decades later to remember comrades who had not returned. The tactics that made U-boats effective also made them vulnerable. Admiral Karl Dönitz had developed what he called Rudel tactic, translated into English as wolf pack tactics. The concept was straightforward. Individual U-boats would patrol designated areas until one spotted a convoy. That boat would then shadow the convoy while transmitting its position to headquarters in France, which would vector other submarines into position for a coordinated night attack. Multiple boats striking simultaneously could overwhelm the escorts protecting a convoy, sinking ship after ship before withdrawing to reload and attack again. In the early years of the war, these tactics proved devastatingly effective. Between July 1940 and March 1941, a period German submariners called the Happy Time, U-boats ravaged British shipping with near impunity. Aces like Otto Kretschmer, Günther Prien, and Joachim Schepke became national heroes, their tonnage tallies broadcast on German radio. the happy time could not last. The same radio transmissions that coordinated Wolfpack attacks gave Allied direction-finding stations the positions of transmitting U-boats. British cryptographers at Bletchley Park penetrated the German naval Enigma cipher, allowing convoys to be routed around known submarine patrol lines. Radar appeared on escorts and aircraft, capable of detecting surfaced U-boats at night. The Mid-Atlantic air gap, the region beyond the range of shore-based aircraft where U-boats had hunted most freely, steadily shrank as longer-range bombers and small escort carriers entered service. By 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had become a campaign of attrition that the U-boats were losing. In May of that year, a month the Germans would remember as Black May, 43 submarines were destroyed. Admiral Dönitz temporarily withdrew his boats from the North Atlantic. They would return, but never again would they threaten to sever the Allied supply lines. The depth charge was the weapon U-boat sailors feared most, and with good reason. A cylindrical canister packed with 300 pounds of high explosive, the depth charge was rolled off the stern of an escort ship or fired outward by projectors called key guns. It sank through the water until a hydrostatic fuse triggered detonation at a preset depth. The explosion itself was not particularly likely to destroy a submarine directly. The pressure hull of a Type 7 could withstand a blast unless the charge detonated within 5 or 6 meters, but near misses were almost as dangerous. The shockwave hammered the hull, cracked welds, ruptured pipes, shattered gauges, and flung crewmen against unyielding steel. Repeated attacks accumulated damage. A valve that held on the first explosion might fail on the fifth. A battery compartment that survived one concussion might flood on the next, mixing sulfuric acid with seawater to produce chlorine gas. Surviving a sustained depth charge attack required equal measures of skill, nerve, and luck. The standard procedure was to dive deep and run silent. Escorts tracked their targets using ASDIC, the British term for sonar, which sent sound pulses through the water and listened for echoes bouncing off the submarine's hull. A deep boat was harder to find. A quiet boat was harder to hold. Every unnecessary noise, every dropped tool, every creaking hinge might betray the submarine's position. Captains ordered absolute silence. Crew members sat motionless at their stations, some chalk white with fear, others bouncing their legs or tugging at their beards in unconscious nervous habits. The attacks came in patterns, a string of explosions that walked across the water above them, each blast announced by a splash, audible through the hull, followed by an eternity of seconds, and then the shattering roar. The boat shuddered, the lights flickered, and men exchanged glances, silently calculating whether this charge had been closer or farther than the last. Peter Peterson, a sailor who survived 3 patrols aboard U-518, later described being caught by 6 American destroyers. The depth charge attack went on for hours. Water pressure crushed the boat deeper and deeper, well past the theoretical safety limits. The gauges only went to 230 meters, about 700 feet. We went past 230 meters, close to 800 feet. There was a lot of water pressure on the hull. Maybe another 10 feet and we would have gone down. During the attack, everyone is quiet and looks up, because that is the direction the noises are coming from. We were not supposed to use up oxygen moving around and talking. Some people were chalk white. Others would bounce their legs up and down or pull on their beards. We were encouraged to sleep, but you only pretended to be asleep. U-518 survived that attack, and Peterson survived his 3 patrols, but he missed the 4th when the boat was lost with all hands. The batteries that powered the submarine's electric motors when submerged presented their own deadly hazards. Rows of massive lead-acid cells filled compartments beneath the crew quarters, each one containing sulfuric acid and producing hydrogen gas during charging. The hydrogen was normally vented through an elaborate system of fans and pipes, but battle damage could disrupt this process. An accumulation of hydrogen above 4.5% created an explosion risk. At 9%, the mixture became violently explosive. Worse still was the prospect of seawater mixing with the battery acid, a reaction that generated chlorine gas. The same chemical weapon that had killed thousands in the trenches of the First World War could fill a submarine's compartments in minutes if flooding reached the battery wells. Crews knew this danger intimately. Some boats were lost when exactly this sequence of events unfolded. The men trapped inside choosing between drowning, suffocating, or attempting an impossible ascent from depths where the outside pressure would crush any escape attempt. When a U-boat did go down, the chances of survival were slim. If the boat Sank while on the surface, crewmen near an open hatch might reach the water. If it went down submerged, the options narrowed catastrophically. German submarines were equipped with escape apparatus, rubber lungs that could theoretically sustain a man during a free ascent from moderate depths. The procedure was taught in training towers where men practiced flooding a compartment, equalizing pressure and floating upward. In combat with the boat at depth, listing, flooding and on fire, these procedures rarely succeeded. Most U-boats that were sunk went down with all hands. Of the roughly 785 German submarines destroyed in the war, the majority yielded no survivors at all. The men simply vanished, entombed in steel shells that still rest on the ocean floor. The torpedoes that U-boats carried were themselves sources of considerable anxiety. The standard German torpedo of the early war years, the G7A, was powered by compressed air and left a visible trail of bubbles that could alert a target or reveal the submarine's position. The electric G7E eliminated the wake but had shorter range and required extensive maintenance to keep its batteries functional. Both types suffered from unreliable detonators in the first years of the war, a scandal that cost Germany dearly during the Norwegian campaign when torpedo after torpedo struck enemy ships without exploding. The problems were eventually corrected, but U-boat commanders never fully trusted their weapons thereafter. Later in the war, acoustic homing torpedoes like the Zaunkönig offered the prospect of hitting maneuvering escorts, but these weapons sometimes turned back toward the sound of their own mother submarine. At least 2 U-boats may have been destroyed by their own homing torpedoes. Combat on the surface, once a viable tactic, became increasingly suicidal as the war progressed. In the early years, U-boats frequently attacked at night while surfaced, their low silhouettes invisible against the dark water, while the convoys they stalked stood out against the lighter horizon. Deck guns supplemented torpedoes for use against smaller vessels or to finish off damaged merchantmen. But radar-equipped aircraft and escorts rendered surface operations steadily more dangerous. By 1943, merely surfacing to charge batteries during darkness exposed a boat to sudden attack. Aircraft equipped with ley lights could illuminate and bomb a surface submarine with almost no warning. The Bay of Biscay, through which U-boats had to transit from their French bases to the Atlantic hunting grounds, became a killing zone where RAF Coastal Command aircraft picked off submarines with grim efficiency. Some captains attempted to fight it out on the surface, manning their anti-aircraft guns against attacking planes. The results were generally fatal for the submarine. The second happy time arrived in early 1942, when Germany declared war on the United States and Dönitz immediately ordered Operation Paukenschlag. Operation Drumbeat, long-range Type 9 submarines prowled the American eastern seaboard, finding targets silhouetted against the lights of coastal cities that had not yet implemented blackout procedures. American commanders ignored British advice about convoying, and the results were catastrophic. In the first 6 months of 1942, U-boats sank hundreds of ships within sight of American beaches, their burning hulks visible to civilians watching from the shore. German commanders called it the American shooting season. The carnage only ended when American forces finally adopted the convoy system and began organized anti-submarine patrols. By then, the U-boats had demonstrated what they could accomplish against an unprepared opponent. The technologies that ultimately defeated the U-boat evolved throughout the war. ASDIC, the British sonar system, could detect submerged submarines but lost contact as the attacking escort passed directly overhead to drop depth charges. This blind spot allowed skilled U-boat commanders to evade destruction by timing their evasive maneuvers precisely. The Hedgehog, introduced in 1942, addressed this limitation. Instead of depth charges dropped astern, the Hedgehog fired a pattern of 24 small bombs ahead of the attacking ship, maintaining sonar contact throughout the approach. These projectiles exploded only on direct contact with a target, eliminating the uncertainty about whether an attack had succeeded. No U-boat is known to have survived a direct Hedgehog hit. Radar advanced from primitive long-wave sets that U-boats could detect with their own receivers to centimetric systems that provided no warning. Aircraft equipped with these radars could locate surface submarines at night, denying them the darkness that had once protected their battery charging operations. The breaking of the German naval Enigma cipher by British codebreakers at Bletchley Park provided intelligence that proved decisive in routing convoys away from U-boat patrol lines. This ultra-secret, as it came to be known, was guarded with extraordinary care. The aces of that period operated with a confidence that bordered on swagger, certain of their abilities and their boats. 3 years later, submarines were being lost on their first patrols at a rate that shocked even the German Naval Command. Statistics compiled after the war revealed that 215 U-boats, roughly a third of all losses, were destroyed before their crews had completed a single successful mission. The experience gap between 1940 and 1944 was unbridgeable. Green crews faced enemies who had spent years perfecting anti-submarine warfare, equipped with technologies that their predecessors could not have imagined. The men who served in U-boats came from the same stock as those in any military branch. Some were ideologically committed Nazis, others cared nothing for politics and simply wanted to survive. Many were motivated by comradeship, professional pride, or the basic human desire not to let down the men around them. The close quarters of submarine life created bonds that few other forms of service could match. These 40 or 50 men depended utterly on each other. A mistake by any one of them could kill everyone aboard. The result was a fierce loyalty that transcended ideology or nationality. German submarine veterans, interviewed decades later, consistently emphasized this aspect of their service. Whatever else they might think of the war, the cause, or the regime, they remembered their crewmates with something approaching reverence. The routine of a patrol followed predictable patterns punctuated by moments of extreme violence. Days might pass in transit, the boat running on the surface at night to charge batteries and diving by day to avoid detection. Watch followed watch in endless rotation. 4 hours on and 8 hours off, the rhythm broken only by the prospect of contact with the enemy. When a convoy was sighted, everything changed. The captain took his place at the periscope, calculating angles and distances, maneuvering for firing position. Torpedo crews stood ready at their stations. Engineers monitored gauges with heightened attention. Then the order to fire, the hiss of compressed air, the shudder as 1.5 tons of explosive left the tube. The waiting that followed was its own form of torture. Minutes might pass before the sound of detonation confirmed a hit, or longer silences announced a miss. Success meant survival for another day. Failure meant the escorts knew where to look. The attacks that followed a successful torpedo strike tested every man aboard. An escort that had gained contact would signal others, and soon the submarine found itself the focus of a coordinated hunt. Destroyers and corvettes dropped patterns of depth charges, searching for the boat hiding in the depths below. The hunted submarine ran silent, its crew barely breathing, conserving oxygen and battery power, while explosions hammered the hull. Some attacks lasted hours. A few extended across entire days, the pursuing escorts spelling each other while the submarine waited, unable to surface, unable to recharge, unable to escape. Those who survived such ordeals carried the memories for the rest of their lives. Those who did not survive left only entries in logbooks maintained by the victorious enemy. Admiral Karl Dönitz drove his submarine fleet with a combination of tactical brilliance and ruthless determination that bordered on callousness. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the Battle of the Atlantic was a tonnage war. Germany needed to sink ships faster than the Allies could build them. Every lost U-boat represented a setback, but only a temporary one if replacements kept coming from the shipyards. This calculus informed his decisions throughout the war. He committed boats to operations that he knew would result in heavy losses, justified by the prospect of hurting Allied shipping. After Black May, he pulled back only briefly before sending his submarines into the Atlantic again, knowing that many would never return. Critics have accused Dönitz of knowingly sending tens of thousands of men to certain death. His defenders argue that he fought the only way that offered any chance of success. The men who served under him appear to have viewed him with respect, perhaps because his own sons served in submarines, and one of them, Peter Dönitz, died aboard U-954 in May 1943. The physical remnants of the U-boat war are scattered across the world's oceans. Hundreds of wrecks lie on the Atlantic floor, most in depths too great for recreational diving, their precise locations often uncertain. A handful of complete submarines survive in museums, the most famous being U-505, captured by American forces in June 1944 and now displayed at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. Walking through its compartments, visitors can begin to comprehend what statistics cannot convey: the cramped quarters, the maze of machinery, the utter absence of comfort or privacy. Other boats rest at Bremerhaven, Laboux, and the Deutsches Technikmuseum in Berlin. These preserved hulls are monuments to engineering as much as to the men who crewed them, and their continued existence ensures that the story of submarine warfare will not be reduced to mere numbers. The Battle of the Atlantic lasted from September 1939 to May 1945, longer than any other campaign of the Second World War. When it ended, Germany had built approximately 1,162 U-boats, of which around 785 had been destroyed. Allied losses included some 3,500 merchant ships, totaling over 14 million tons, along with 175 naval vessels. The human cost was proportionate. Roughly 30,000 merchant seamen died from attacks by German submarines. Against this toll, 28,000 of the 40,000 men who served in the U-boat arm perished, a casualty rate approaching 70%. No other branch of any military service came close to such figures. The U-boat sailors who survived did so against odds that would have discouraged any rational calculation. What drove men to volunteer for service that offered such slim prospects of survival? The question does not have a single answer. For some, it was the prestige associated with submarine service, the sense of belonging to an elite. For others, it was the additional pay, meaningful in a society still recovering from economic depression. Many were simply young men who did not fully comprehend the dangers until it was too late to reconsider. The propaganda of the early war years celebrated U-boat aces as heroes of the fatherland, their exploits broadcast to millions. By 1943, the propaganda had shifted to emphasizing duty and sacrifice, tacit acknowledgement that victory was no longer the likely outcome. Still, the volunteers came, and still they went to sea, and still the vast majority of them did not return. The experience of serving aboard a German submarine in World War II was defined by paradox. These vessels were among the most sophisticated weapon systems of their era, yet life aboard them resembled something from an earlier century. Their crews were highly trained technicians who lived like medieval monks, compressed together in spaces barely fit for human habitation. They faced enemies they could not see, fought battles decided by mathematics and physics as much as by courage, and died in numbers that defied comprehension. The iron coffins of the Kriegsmarine were laboratories of human endurance, testing how much men could bear before breaking. That so many bore so much for so long remains one of the most remarkable chapters of naval warfare. German engineers worked frantically to develop technologies that might restore the U-boat's advantage. The snorkel, a breathing tube that allowed submarines to run their diesel engines while submerged just below the surface, was adopted from captured Dutch vessels in 1943. It permitted battery charging without full surfacing, reducing vulnerability to radar detection. But snorkel operations were miserable. The head of the tube had to remain above water, limiting depth to periscope level where the boat was still vulnerable. When waves washed over the snorkel head, automatic valves closed to prevent flooding and the running diesel sucked air from inside the submarine, creating agonizing pressure changes that burst eardrums and caused nosebleeds. Crews endured this torture for hours at a time, the alternative being surface charging under enemy aircraft patrol. More promising was the revolutionary Type WW2 electro-boot, designed to spend its entire patrol submerged. Massive battery capacity, 3 times that of a Type 7, allowed underwater speeds of 17 knots for brief periods and extended submerged endurance measured in days rather than hours. Streamlined hulls and powerful electric motors made these boats faster underwater than on the surface. Prefabricated construction techniques were supposed to produce them in quantity, with sections built at dispersed inland factories and assembled at coastal shipyards. But Allied bombing disrupted the program, and training new crews for radically different boats proved difficult. Only 2 Type 20 submarines completed war patrols before Germany surrendered, neither engaging enemy shipping. Had these vessels entered service earlier in quantity, the Battle of the Atlantic might have taken a different course. As it was, they demonstrated what German technology could achieve when it was already too late to matter. The U-boat sailor of World War II belonged to a breed that no longer exists. Modern submarines are spacious by comparison, equipped with air conditioning, adequate berthing and amenities that would have seemed luxurious to a 1943 crew. Nuclear propulsion eliminates the need to surface, radar, and sonar have evolved beyond recognition, and guided missiles have replaced unguided torpedoes. But the fundamental nature of submarine service, the isolation, the dependence on machinery, the knowledge that the ocean waits patiently to crush any vessel that loses its integrity, these things have not changed. Every submariner since 1945 has inherited something from those who went before, from the men who rode steel tubes through the deadliest naval campaign in history. Their story deserves to be remembered, not because they fought for a cause worth celebrating, but because their experience illuminates what human beings can endure when circumstances demand it. If you found this video insightful, watch what happened to German U-boats after WW2. Next, a deep look at how the U-boat fleet was captured, studied, and scattered across the world in the aftermath of the war. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more History Inside. Thanks for watching.